Hey, hi to our lovely listeners. Welcome back. And if you're new to this podcast, greetings. We are Yes, No, Maybe So, a roundtable podcast where we talk about all things history. We may or may not agree, but we can certainly learn something. I'm here today with my co-hosts, Esta, Eric, and Sakif. Today, we also have two guests here with us who have really done their research on today's topic. Please welcome Pave and Kode.
Hello everyone! We're huge fans of you guys, especially Taufik.
It's Sakif.
My bad, Shafiq.
Okay. Anyway, getting back on topic, this week we will be talking about European imperialism in the 1600s to 1800s. Well, more specifically, how much realpolitik impacted imperialism and whether there are other rationalizations for it.
Actually, does everyone know that there are two types of imperialism?
Do you mean old and new imperialism?
Yes, that's exactly what I meant. Let me define imperialism first. So imperialism means the domination of a country's political, economic and cultural systems and agendas over another. There were two types of imperialism, old and new. Unlike what everyone believes, imperialism did not start in the 19th century, but in the 16th century. From the 16th to the early 19th century, specifically from 1450 to 1650, it was known as the age of old imperialism. The motives for old imperialism were glory, God, and gold. What does glory, God, and gold mean? So glory means power or fame. Explorers wanted to gain power for themselves and their country by taking over new lands and expanding their empires. God refers to how Europeans wanted to spread Christianity to the New World. And gold means actual gold, silver, and spices. Europeans wanted spices and raw materials and found new resources which could be traded for profit.
Oh wow, that is interesting. What did the European nations do then?
So in the period of old imperialism, in order to find a direct trade route to Asia, European nations settled for colonies through military conquest in India, South Africa, East Indies, and the Americas. They built trading stations to obtain raw materials and free labor along the coasts of Africa and China. These European nations respected and sought the help of the local leaders to protect the economic interests. The colonies brought in wealth and materials they could not produce on their own land. By 1800, Great Britain had established powerful colonies in Australia, South Africa, and India, while Spain, Holland, and France controlled South and Central America, the East Indies, Louisiana, and French Guiana, respectively.
So how about new imperialism?
So new imperialism is part of where mostly everyone knows how Europeans dominated most nations around the globe, which occurred from 1870 to 1919. So more European colonies were established as stronger European nations dominated weaker ones around the world through advanced military technologies, political domination, and direct rule. This occurred due to the Industrial Revolution, which gave rise to flourishing industrial economies and thus the need to expand to seek revenue. Other reasons include nationalism, humanitarian and religious reasons, and many more. It sparked European nations' ambitions and reaffirmed their resolve to pursue aggressive global expansion. This aggressive expansion was to claim an overseas territory and to govern the lives of the natives living there in a way that benefits them.
Could you give us more examples?
Okay, for example, they demanded more control over the economic, political, and social lives of the natives, and they wanted to exploit the economies of the foreign lands to benefit their own economies. Furthermore, they forced the natives to let go of their customs and religions and adopt the European ones instead.
Oh, that was a lot to take in. How about giving a brief overview of old and new imperialism?
Sure. To summarize, colonies existed in the old imperialism with limited power and influence from the Europeans. However, in the new imperialism, European nations wanted more direct control and influence and power over those foreign lands. Those colonies were established as part of the imperial design. It was the hegemony of European nations over others, driven by political, economic, and cultural motives, even in the absence of direct colonial occupation. So, how are the two types alike? They're both alike in terms of elite political control, the exploitation of foreign labor, resources, and economies, and being guided by religion and superiority.
So, how is realpolitik related to imperialism?
Wait. Maybe you can describe what is realpolitik?
Sure. We should start with some basic definitions so everyone is on the same page. Realpolitik is a foreign policy doctrine that emphasizes the pursuit of practical, limited objectives over ideological or moral considerations. It is often associated with moderation and a willingness to use force if necessary, but it also emphasizes the importance of negotiation and compromise. And for listeners more unfamiliar with history, European imperialism is the process by which European countries acquired and controlled territory outside of Europe. This process began in the 15th century with the Age of Exploration and continued until the mid-20th century with the decolonization of Africa and Asia.
I don't really get it. Is there maybe a context of realpolitik being used during that time period?
Actually, Otto von Bismarck is the perfect person for this.
Sorry, Otto what? What did he do?
Well, Otto von Bismarck was a Prussian statesman and diplomat who had a considerable impact on European politics from the 1860s through the 1890s. He assumed the positions of Prussian Prime Minister and Foreign Minister in September 1862. As part of his strategy, Bismarck made every effort to ensure Prussia's dominance on the world stage. His ultimate objective was the reunification of Germany, even though Prussia was at the time regarded as the weakest of the European powers. So Realpolitik, a blend of diplomatic and political instruments based on the situation, was a strategy used by Bismarck. In 1871, he successfully brought Germany back together through a combination of alliances and conflict. Up until his resignation in 1890, Bismarck was successful in keeping Germany's status as the dominant power in Europe and maintaining peace. Some instances of Bismarck's employment of realpolitik are inventing a justification for an attack on Austria and duping Napoleon III into waging war with Prussia.
Oh, so something like the scramble for Africa is an example of realpolitik?
Yes, it is. Because of its interior, such as deserts and mountains, Africa was called the Dark Continent by Henry Stanley in his 1878 travelogue. It remained unknown to the outside world until the late 19th century. The occupation of Egypt by the British and Belgium's entry to the Congo sparked the scramble for African colonial territories. European nations occupied only a small part of Africa in 1880. However, by 1914, all nations except Ethiopia and Liberia remained independent.
So how did this scramble happen then?
So Otto von Bismarck, 1815 to 1898, the Chancellor of Germany, and Jules Ferry, 1832 to 1893, Premier of France, arranged the Berlin Conference for European nations to discuss the colonization of the African continent rather than going to war. On November 15, 1884, major European players such as Portugal, Germany, Great Britain, France, and King Leopold II's Belgium convened in Berlin for a diplomatic settlement of dividing up Africa among themselves as part of their own empires. So King Leopold II already had his stakes on Congo. No African leaders were involved in this meeting. Oh, then what happened during the meeting? So over the next 3 months, under Otto von Bismarck's watchful gaze, they drew and redrew boundaries on a map, and it came to a successful end on February 26, 1885. Just like that, European nations were in a frenzy to snatch slices from how King Leopold II described as the magnificent cake. It was after this conference which led to the scramble for Africa. From the years 1878 to 1914, European nations divided the African continent and set national borders, disregarding local ethnic and political divisions, while Ethiopia and Liberia remained independent.
Well, in that case, how did Ethiopia and Liberia remain independent?
So America resettled free slaves back to Africa, which was in Liberia, and it became an independent state in 1847 due to the perceived growing problem of free black slaves by white elites in America. An already independent Ethiopia defeated Italian invasion in 1896, reaffirmed the independence from imperial powers.
What are the reasons for European nations to scramble and colonize Africa and govern people who do not look like them?
Well, that is because they wanted to light up the Dark Continent under the banner of commerce, Christianity, and civilization. Wow, how atrocious. But what about Congo? Why was Leopold interested in Congo?
I can add to that. So, firstly, in understanding the concept of realpolitik and its role in the spread of European imperialism, the Congo Free State, otherwise known as Belgian Congo, and King Leopold II of Belgium's atrocities stand as one of the more prominent conquests of the late 19th century, and initiated when King Leopold set his eyes on the natural riches of Congo. He employed British explorer Henry Morton Stanley to establish treaties with local Congolese chiefs to gain authority for land use. So in doing so, Leopold actually made use of their English illiteracy and even altered the treaties afterward to aid his narrative during the 1885 Berlin Conference, where he would successfully persuade European nations to recognize the Congo Free State, which would be a private colony in which he is the sole proprietor.
So what Leopold did with the treaties, it was all just a trick to make it seem like the Congolese agreed to be under his reign?
Pretty much. And it can be noticed that Leopold's ownership of Congo was agreed upon only by European powers and with little to no ethical considerations for the Congo locals.
How did he even present himself at the Berlin Conference though? I can't imagine anyone would agree to give up such a huge portion of land to just one person.
Well, Leopold did it under the guise of wanting to protect trade in Africa, as well as to spread Christianity and other Western benefits. I guess a lot of people believed him because it sounded so noble, but in reality, Leopold was often described as a firm believer in the economic profits of colonial exploitation. To put it simply, he was very business-oriented.
Wow, such dedication.
But was there any force employed in this case? Because it seems like Leopold was just manipulating both Congo and other European nations.
Oh no, there were definitely atrocities committed. Did you know Leopold was actually considered one of the deadliest kings in history? He was given that title mostly because of red rubber.
Red? Like the red color of rubber bands?
No, it means something different here. Essentially, in 1887, due to certain technological advancements, there was a sudden spike in the demand for rubber, which just so happened to be a commodity that Congo was highly abundant with. So naturally, Leopold saw this as an opportunity to amass great wealth, and he would use the armies he established in the Congo Free State, the Forces Publiques, to ensure locals would meet the high quotas set for rubber harvesting. And if anyone failed to meet these quotas, they would be killed by Leopold's soldiers as punishment.
Oh my gosh, that's horrible.
Oh, it gets worse. Where this gets even bloodier is the fact that soldiers would have to account for any ammunition they used to kill underperforming locals by chopping off their hands and presenting them to their commanders as proof that their bullets were not in fact wasted or put to other uses. However, many soldiers also used their guns for hunting. Hence, to cover up for the missing bullets, they would round up living people and collect their hands instead. So yes, to answer your question, the Congo Free State did not run without deadly force.
Okay, wow. That really was an intense eye-opener. Africa really can't catch a break, huh?
Actually, I just remember another example, which is the Opium War in China.
Oh yeah, I didn't think of that. Tell us more about it, Esther.
Yeah, sure. In mid-19th century, British and other European countries began to export flooding opium to the Chinese market as an exchange of vast amounts of silver. However, China realized the addiction of opium, so the Chinese government attempted to crack down on the importation of opium. In contrast, since it's an easier way for Britain to gain many profits, the British responded militarily, and the conflicts between these two countries led to the Opium War in 1839. As a result of the failure of the Opium War in 1842, China had to accept the Treaty of Nanking. It contained many unfair rules, such as opening more ports for importation of opium, cession of Hong Kong as a colony, and paying the British government sum of 21 million Singapore dollars in installments of over 3 years, even being charged 5% annual interest if the money wasn't paid in a timely manner.
That sounds so unfair for Chinese people. The Chinese government only tried to prevent the widespread use of opium as well as its addiction, and they were forced to defend against such a brutal violence.
Yeah, it's true. If we take the perspective of the Chinese, it is a very unfair treaty, which they were forced to apply. The treaty caused them to lose the territory, disrupt the stability, and became a humiliation for China. However, if we think about the Opium War from the British perspective, He was just motivated by increasing the profit and expanding the market, which fits the concept of imperialism and realpolitik accurately. The British tried to maintain a profitable market and ensure free trade to assert their economic dominance, and the Opium War clearly shows imperial ambition, including military force and diplomatic negotiations.
Interesting. But hold on. We kept talking about realpolitik, but that cannot be the only factor in shaping the thrust of European imperialism, right?
I agree. And yes, you're right, it's not the only rationalization for European imperialism. There are many others as well.
Does anyone know other factors apart from realpolitik that shape the thrust of European imperialism?
I know one. It would definitely have to be technology.
Oh, yes. Can you elaborate more?
Well, we first have to understand why African cultures were considered by almost all 19th century European observers to be devoid of scientific thinking. During the 19th century, the Europeans had already invented steam engines which could be fitted into their ships. These steam ships were generally faster than sail ships. While sail ships could only achieve average speeds of 5 to 10 knots, steam ships could reach speeds of around 12 to 15 knots, almost double, depending on the vessel. In addition, the Europeans were armed with muskets as weapons.
Then what was the state of technology in Africa?
Technology in Africa at that point in time was limited to weaving, cutting canoes, making rude weapons such as swords and daggers, and practicing a rough metallurgy.
Oh, wow. Africans seem pretty behind in terms of technology.
Absolutely. Imagine how superior the Europeans felt, how good they felt about themselves knowing that they are more technologically superior as compared to the Africans. So this assessment became more and more central to efforts to demonstrate the validity of the long-standing view of Africans as backwards and inferior people.
Nice one, Sakif. Though I do have a question. How was Europe's technological superiority related to the European colonization of Africa?
Well, firstly, the Africans looked up to the Europeans because of their technological superiority. So there was this instant where an African leader insisted on attempting to play the harmonium. When he could not, he remarked, "Only white people can do anything good, wood or ivory speak." On another instance, where an African exclaimed after inspecting the watches, guns, and compasses, "Oh, these white men, they make all the wonderful things and know how to use them. Surely men who know so much ought to never die. They must be clever enough to make a medicine to keep them always young and strong so that they will never die."
Wow, they must have been really impressed with the Europeans.
Yeah, no doubt. Since the Africans idolized the Europeans because of their technological superiority, it made it easier for Europeans to control them. The Europeans at time would use force in order to have the upper hand against the Africans, and it was definitely made a lot easier with their technological superiority in weapons such as muskets, which were better than the African swords and daggers. The Africans simply had no means to resist and fight back as the Europeans were so far ahead in terms of technological advancement. With all that has been said, the nature of social and economic interaction between European and colonized Africans is where the Africans would serve as builders of railways, seaports, and mine shafts, and the suppliers of finance and labor capital. Basically, the Africans were merely labor capital to grow European empires. All this would not have been possible without the technological prowess of European nations. It also showed how Europeans were arrogant in believing that technological superiority exemplifies the domination of superiority in all other aspects, such as religion, culture, and even biology.
Actually, not just technology, but perceived cultural and religious superiority can also be another rationalization. Do any of you guys know why?
Does it have something to do with Christian missionaries?
Yes, you're correct. Christian missionaries played a significant role in the spread of European imperialism in the 17th to 19th centuries. They often traveled to newly colonized territories alongside European explorers and settlers, and their work was often seen as a way to so-called civilize and Christianize the native populations. Missionaries established schools, hospitals, and other social institutions, and they also played a role in the spread of Western values and culture. The impact of Christian missionaries on imperialism was complex and varied. On the one hand, missionaries often helped to improve the lives of the indigenous peoples by providing them with an education, healthcare, and other essential services. On the other hand, missionaries also helped to justify European imperialism by portraying indigenous cultures as backward and primitive. In some cases, missionaries even collaborated with colonial governments to suppress indigenous resistances. The legacy of Christian missionaries in the age of imperialism is still debated today. Some historians argue that missionaries were primarily motivated by a desire to spread the gospel, while others argue that they were more interested in promoting European interests. Regardless of their motivations, there is no doubt that Christian missionaries played a significant role in the shaping of the modern world.
Yeah, what you said is true. I feel that another factor that ties in closely with your point will be notions of national pride and prestige as well.
I actually wanted to talk about that next. Sure. Notions of national pride and prestige play a significant role in the expansion of European imperialism during the 17th and 19th centuries. During this period, European powers were increasingly competing with each other for economic and political power. As a result, they sought to acquire colonies as a way to assert their dominance and enhance their prestige. The idea that colonies were a sign of national greatness was not new. However, it became increasingly prevalent during the 17th and 18th centuries as European powers began to view colonies as a source of wealth and resources. In addition, the rise of nationalism in Europe also contributed to the growth of imperialism. As people began to identify more strongly with their own nation, they saw colonies as a way to promote the interests of their country and to enhance its reputation. The notion that colonies were a sign of national greatness had a number of important consequences. First, it led to increased competition between European powers as they each sought to acquire as many colonies as possible. Secondly, it justified the use of force to acquire colonies as European powers believed that they had a right to conquer and rule over other peoples. Thirdly, it led to the exploitation of colonial peoples as European powers extracted resources from their colonies and denied them of basic rights.
Interesting. But are there any other rationalizations that we can think of?
Honestly, I can't think of any at the moment.
Actually, there is. It's a factor that is sometimes neglected according to John Galbraith, and that would be turbulent frontiers.
Wait, hold on. Who is John Galbraith, and what does turbulent frontiers even mean?
Well, John Galbraith actually wrote a paper called The Turbulent Frontier as a factor in British expansion. He attributed imperial expansion that took place in the late 1800s to the notion of turbulent frontiers, which influenced policy to varying degrees in different areas of the British Empire.
Oh wow. Can you expand more on your point?
Sure. So in the 19th century, the empire was considered to be an anachronism. The general consensus was that colonies were liabilities, being expensive to defend and difficult to govern. So unsurprisingly, some members of parliament favoured imperial dismemberment. Paradoxically, the empire was nonetheless expanded in India, South Africa, Malaya, and North America despite there being no desire to do so in the middle of the 19th century. Wait, what? So the empire still expanded despite not wanting to? That's weird. Yeah, that's why in an effort to clarify this discrepancy between the proclaimed policy and reality, Galbraith argues that, quote, part of the explanation lies in the pull exercised by turbulent frontiers adjacent to the area of imperial authority and in the wide powers exercised by imperial viceroys in an era of primitive communications.
Are there any examples for this?
Well, one such example is none other than India. There were differing perspectives between the governors and directors of the East India Company regarding expansion, and according to the directors of the East India Company and to most British statesmen, British governors should direct their energies to preserving tranquility within their borders. However, to the governors, commerce could not be secure so long as there were rival military powers on frontiers.
Just you mentioned primitive communications. How did that play a role?
Yeah. So, due to the primitive state of communications, like you said, the local governor in India, Wellesley, had to exert power largely unrestricted during his term, since it took weeks to get a reply from London. It was impossible to ascertain from London the nature of instability on the subcontinent, the specifics of the French threat, or the ways to guarantee British security in India. It was necessary to make decisions right away.
Then what kind of decisions did he have to make?
Well, when Wellesley arrived in India, he was given orders to preserve the balance of power that had been in place ever since the Treaty of Seringapatam.
What is the Treaty of Seringapatam?
Well, the Treaty of Seringapatam, signed in 1792, helped put an end to the Third Anglo-Mysore War. Lord Cornwallis, on behalf of the British East India Company, the Nizam of Hyderabad, the Maratha Empire, Tipu Sultan, the Sultan of Mysore, signed it. And however, when Wellesley arrived, the Maratha states were still a very serious menace. After the Treaty of Seringapatam reduced Tipu of Mysore's territory, he awaited the chance to exact revenge on the company. Tipu received guidance and help from French operatives as he prepared for battle. Zaman Shah of Afghanistan also allegedly had plans to invade India. So the British presence in India may have been overturned by a coalition of these forces. Oh, then how did Wellesley solve this issue? Wellesley eliminated the threat from Mysore by pressuring the Nizam of Hyderabad to fire his French officers and replace them with British, and by coercing Tipu into a conflict that resulted in Tipu's death.
Is that how the British Empire expanded?
Yes, the new territory was added to the quote, formal empire when the colonial authorities took measures to make the frontier safe because of a fear of their power being undermined and to maintain supremacy over the whole area. Like what Galbraith said, governors continue to try to eliminate the disorderly frontier by annexations, which in turn produced new frontier problems and further expansion. The turbulent frontier consequently contributed to the paradox of the 19th century empire that, quote, grew in spite of itself.
I see. Wow, I have learned a lot today about European imperialism, from realpolitik as a motivation behind imperialism, as well as other factors such as technology, religion, and turbulent frontier, which also played a part in imperialism. However, I think we can all agree that realpolitik is indeed the key motivation behind European imperialism. The Europeans wanted to expand their empire in the most efficient way possible so as to avoid the problem of law of diminishing returns as mentioned by Hobson. However, as humanity progresses, humanity must move away from the assumption that the only test of national efficiency is by contest of military or commercial power. Only with this will humanity progress further in other aspects where the higher struggle shall become possible.
Very well said, Sakif. Unfortunately, while this has been a truly fruitful and enlightening discussion, this is all the time we have for today. We hope all our listeners have enjoyed this discourse and have learned more than a thing or two about European imperialism. Thank you again, Pave and Kode, for joining us today. Tune in next week to Yes, No, Maybe So for our next episode. See you!